A rare K9 German Shepherd was born, but what happened next shocked even the veterinarians. No one expected anything unusual when the litter arrived. Just another night at the kennel, another healthy batch of working-line pups. But when the smallest German Shepherd was born, something about him was different. His eyes opened sooner. His instincts were sharper. He didn't bark, he observed. Vets called it a miracle. Trainers called it impossible. But what happened in the weeks that followed left everyone, even the most seasoned veterinarians, completely speechless. Because this rare K9 wasn't just born different. He was born with a purpose that would change lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That's how we bring more incredible stories like this straight to you. At 3:42 a.m. on a snow-covered January morning in Bozeman, Montana, something extraordinary happened. Inside the sterile birthing room of a rural veterinary clinic, 7 tiny German Shepherds entered the world. Officer Callan Rhodes stood just outside the door, pacing in slow, steady lines, his boots squeaking on the tile. It had been years since he felt this kind of anticipation, not since combat zones or high-stakes raids. But this was different, quieter, personal. These weren't ordinary puppies. They were born from a legacy. Their mother, Hera, had served with Callan during deployment in Syria. She'd saved 6 lives in one day, including his. Their father, Cade, was one of the sharpest detection dogs in Montana State K9 history. These pups represented courage, instinct, and generations of finely honed discipline. And Callan had waited 9 long months for a chance to meet the one pup who might become his next partner, the first since losing his dog, Knox. Dr. Mira Alvarez opened the door with soft, deliberate movements. "They're here," she said. Callan followed her into the room. Hera was lying down, her body spent but her gaze steady. She lifted her head slightly when she saw him, letting out a low, familiar huff. Not a growl, but recognition. 7 puppies lay beneath the heat lamp, bundled in towels. 6 of them were squirming, their tiny bodies twisting and yipping, little paws kicking in every direction. But one lay still, at the very edge of the nest, jet black with almost no tan markings, just a subtle trace along his front legs. His eyes were open. That alone was strange. Newborn pups didn't open their eyes this early. But this one, he was staring at Callan. "He hasn't cried once," Dr. Alvarez said. "We checked his vitals 3 times. Strong heartbeat, normal breathing, no signs of trauma. But he's been like this since birth. Alert, calm, silent." Callan crouched beside the towels, transfixed. The tiny pup blinked. "Once, twice. Feels like he's watching me," Callan whispered. Alvarez nodded. "We're calling it accelerated neural response. But I've never seen anything like it. It's not just awareness. It's focus." Callan extended a finger gently toward the pup. Instead of recoiling or whining like the others had, the little dog pressed his head against his knuckle and didn't move. He just stayed there, present, still, entirely connected. "I'll call him Ekko," Callan said softly. "He doesn't speak. He listens." The name stuck. In the weeks that followed, Ekko became the quiet center of attention in the compound. While his siblings played, nipped, and barked, Ekko watched. He moved with eerie precision, almost like he was calculating every step. At 1 week, he opened both eyes fully. At 2, he stood and walked, while the others still crawled clumsily. At 4 weeks, he watched the kennel gate as trainers passed by, but he never barked or begged. He studied, and by 6 weeks, Ekko responded to visual cues no one had taught him. "He's not reacting," said Jay Collier, the lead trainer. "He's interpreting." By 8 weeks, it became obvious that Ekko's learning curve wasn't just ahead of the others. It was beyond them. He navigated beginner obstacle courses without hesitation. He followed Callan's hand gestures as if they'd been practicing for months. Dr. Alvarez began documenting everything. His neurological scans showed increased activity across multiple regions of the brain. His sensory responses were sharper than normal, sometimes reacting to sound before the source was even audible to humans. But while his intelligence grew, so did a noticeable behavioral trait. He bonded with no one but Callan. Trainers tried to feed him. He wouldn't take food from them. Volunteers tried to play. Ekko would sit still and stare. Even his own mother, Hera, received disrespect, but nothing emotional. He's not antisocial, Alvarez explained. He's exclusive. He's chosen Callan. And that might never change. That worried some at the K9 facility. One-bond dogs were rare and sometimes unstable. If something ever happened to Callan, would Ekko be able to work with anyone else? Callan wasn't worried. He had lost one partner before. He wasn't going to lose this one. At 13 weeks, after consultation with Alvarez, the training board, and a reluctant signature from the chief, Ekko was officially assigned to Officer Rhodes. It was the youngest K9 pairing ever approved in the department's history. There was pushback. Too soon. Too unusual. Too risky. But no one could deny the results. Ekko wasn't just responsive. He was anticipating. During their first solo trial, Callan threw a tennis ball over a snowbank without showing Ekko the direction. The puppy sprinted before the ball hit the ground, cutting across the curve and intercepting it mid-bounce. Instinct. Jake had asked. Callan shook his head. Intelligence. But that intelligence came with a price, because Ekko refused to follow anyone else. And that became a problem. During a wilderness training exercise at the base of the Bridger Range, Ekko and Callan were running scent drills along a wooded path. The snow had lightened, but the trees were dense. Ekko was tracking beautifully, until he suddenly stopped. His body stiffened. Ears up, and without warning, he bolted. Ekko! Callan shouted, startled. Come! But the pup disappeared between the pines like smoke. Callan followed, breath sharp in his lungs, boots crunching on hard snow. Ekko! No sound. Then, a distant whimper. Callan pushed through a thick patch of brush and found Ekko pressed against a broken-down hunting shed. Inside, barely visible under the debris, was a child. A small boy. No coat, no shoes, lips blue. Ekko was beside him, curled around the child's body, sharing warmth, refusing to leave. Callan crawled in fast, checked the boy's pulse, and radioed for backup. They later learned the child had gone missing from a cabin over 2 miles away. The search team had missed him. Drones had failed to detect heat under the collapsed roof. But Ekko had known. Not by sight, not by noise. He had felt it. Back at the station, Dr. Alvarez reviewed Ekko's latest scans. They're off the chart, she said. I think he's perceiving more than we can measure. Emotional signatures. Discomfort. Stress. It's not just training anymore. He's operating on another level. Callan sat in silence, staring through the kennel glass. Ekko was curled in the corner, calm as ever, eyes barely open, but still watching, always watching. Callan placed his hand on the glass. You're not just different, he whispered. You're meant for something else. And deep down, he knew the story of Ekko was only just beginning. What came next would shake the nation. From the moment Ekko rescued the lost boy in the snow, everything changed. What began as quiet fascination around the precinct turned into something deeper, awe, curiosity, even fear. The video clip from Callan's body cam had circulated privately among senior officers. A 13-week-old K9 tracking a child that heat sensors and adults had missed. How did he do it? People kept asking, but Callan didn't know. He only knew what he felt. This dog wasn't just smart. He was connected in a way that defied every rule book. Ekko settled into life with Callan, like he'd always belonged there. He didn't chew shoes or bark at the mailman. He followed without being told, observed everything, and slept curled near the front door every night, facing outward, always alert. Still, Callan knew something wasn't right. It started during group training drills. While the other pups interacted with multiple handlers, Ekko refused to respond to anyone but Callan. Not with food, not with toys, not even basic commands. He didn't growl or act aggressive. He simply ignored everyone else completely. Ekko's too bonded to you, said Jake Collier, the head K9 trainer, during a staff meeting. We've seen this before. It's a problem. Callan crossed his arms. He listens. He performs. What more do you want? Jake replied, he listens to you, but what happens if you're injured in the field? Or worse, AK-9 has to take backup commands. That's non-negotiable. There was silence in the room. Finally, Captain Ridley looked up from his notepad. Callan, we'll give you 2 weeks. If Ekko doesn't show progress with a secondary handler, we'll have to consider reassignment. Reassignment? Callan echoed, stunned. You want to give him to someone else? We don't want to, Ridley replied, but we have to know he's safe for duty. Callan tried. Over the next 10 days, he brought in trusted colleagues to work with Ekko, Deputy Liz, Officer Rios, even Jake himself. But the result was always the same. Ekko would sit still, stare, wait. He wouldn't obey commands. He wouldn't take food. He'd wait until Callan returned, then follow him without hesitation. He's not defiant, Dr. Alvarez said after observing a session. He's exclusive. His mind is wired for one person. That's you. Callan sat beside her, frustrated. So what do I do? Let him go? Not necessarily, she said. But you may have to trust that Ekko knows what he's doing, even if it doesn't follow protocol. On the 12th day, something happened that no one could have prepared for. Callan and Ekko were out near the state forest trails for a solo tracking exercise. No radios, no backup, just the two of them and a standard set recovery mission. The snow was thin, the air bitterly cold. Callan had just signaled Ekko to begin his search pattern when his boot caught on a hidden root beneath the ice. He slipped, fell hard. His head cracked against the frozen ground, and everything went black. When Callan woke up, the world was spinning. Pain pulsed through his skull, and his vision blurred at the edges. He reached up slowly and felt warm blood trailing for his scalp. He tried to sit up, but something stopped him. A weight, a warmth. Ekko, curled against his side, silent, still, waiting, not panicked. Just there, Callan turned his head and saw something flashing on his vest. The emergency GPS. Activated. The signal had been sent. Callan hadn't touched it, but Ekko had. Rescue arrived 20 minutes later. Callan had a concussion and mild hypothermia, but he would recover. The real story, the one that would be told across departments for years, was that Ekko had waited by his handler's unconscious body, kept him warm, and somehow activated the emergency beacon using his paw. No training, no instruction, just instinct, just loyalty. Back at the station, Captain Ridley called Callan into his office. He didn't say much, just slid a file across the table. Inside, Ekko's permanent certification. No conditions, no probation. He earned it, Ridley said. Whatever he is, he's yours. Callan nodded, heartful. Thank you. But before he left the office, Ridley added one thing. Just be careful. That kind of bond, it's powerful. And sometimes it's fragile too. That night, Callan sat on the porch with Ekko curled at his feet. The stars blinked above them in the clear Montana sky. I don't know what you are, buddy, Callan whispered, but I know what you're not. He looked down. Ekko was staring straight ahead, unmoving. You're not a mistake. You're not a problem. You're mine. The dog leaned forward and placed his head gently on Callan's knee. And in that silence, in that unspoken promise, Callan understood. This wasn't just partnership. It was something deeper, something tested, something proven. But their bond was about to face a storm no one could predict. Because Ekko's next call-out wouldn't be a simulation. And this time, not everyone would make it out. The call came just after midnight. A warehouse fire on the north side of Bozeman. Suspicious activity reported before the flames. No signs of forced entry, but someone had heard glass shatter and then seen movement through a back alley window just minutes before the building erupted. Bozeman PD was already en route, but the moment Callan heard the details, his gut tightened. Could be an arson trap, he said to dispatch. Get me on site with Ekko. We'll clear it before fire gets too close. 10 minutes later, Callan's SUV skidded to a stop at the edge of a frozen parking lot, headlights catching smoke billowing from the back of an old supply warehouse. Ekko was already at the rear hatch, ears up, tail low, alert, ready. The building groaned under the weight of the heat. It was a two-story structure, old and dry. Flames had started at the rear, but hadn't consumed everything yet. There was still time to check for survivors. Callan clicked on his flashlight, reached for Ekko's vest, and spoke clearly. Search. Live alert. Let's go. Ekko sprang into action. They entered through a side door, the smoke thick but manageable. Visibility was low. Ekko moved ahead, nose low to the ground, weaving through debris and shadows. Callan's voice echoed through his comm. Ekko left sweep. The pup curved instantly toward the far wall, checking doorways and overturned crates. For 5 tense minutes, the only sound was creaking wood and the distant roar of fire pressing against the rear structure. Then Ekko stopped. Ears up, tail straight. He barked once, sharp and urgent. Got something? Callan asked, stepping forward, his flashlight cutting across broken shelves and dark soot. Ekko moved to a pile of burned insulation. He began digging. Callan rushed forward, and then he saw it. A hand. Small. Ash-covered. A child. Dispatch! We have a live find. Minor unconscious. Request immediate medical. Location pin now. Callan dropped beside the child. A boy no older than 10, limp and pale but breathing. Ekko stayed beside him, body low, protective. We're getting you out, Callan whispered. But then a loud crack split the air. The ceiling above the far stairwell collapsed, and the flames surged forward. Ekko, heal! Callan shouted, scooping the boy into his arms and bolting toward the side exit. But debris rained down behind them. The hallway they had used to enter was blocked in seconds. Callan turned, and Ekko was still beside him. No leash, no hesitation. Secondary exit now. They turned into a narrow office corridor, smoke pouring from a vent above. Callan's lungs burned. The boy was heavy, limp against his shoulder, but he didn't stop. Ekko led the way. At the end of the corridor, a locked emergency door. Callan cursed. No, no, no. He kicked once. Nothing. He looked down at Ekko. Find me a way out. Ekko turned, sniffed, then bolted to the left, into what looked like a maintenance closet. Callan followed, stumbling. Inside, behind old pipework, Ekko was barking at a vent, a shaft wide enough. Smart boy, Callan muttered. He hoisted the boy through first, pushing him gently into the narrow metal tunnel. Ekko leapt in next, moving ahead on his belly. Callan followed last, coughing, barely holding consciousness. The shaft was tight. Metal burned through his gloves. He kept one hand on the boy's foot, the other dragging them both forward inch by inch. Ekko barked once. Daylight. Then air. Cold. Smoke-free. Real. Ekko burst out first. Then Callan pushed the boy through and collapsed behind them both. They had made it. Fire crews arrived seconds later. Paramedics rushed in. The boy survived. He had wandered in looking for shelter after leaving a group home, and likely triggered an old electrical circuit. If Ekko hadn't found him, he would have died of smoke inhalation within minutes. As Callan sat on the sidewalk, mask dangling from his neck, a blanket over his shoulders, Ekko pressed against his side. Neither of them said a word. They didn't have to. Back at the station, Callan filed his report with trembling fingers. He had second-degree burns on his right hand and smoke damage to his lungs. But Ekko had saved them both. Again, Dr. Alvarez came by to check on the pup. He's okay, she said. Minor bruising, no burns. But his vitals are elevated. He hasn't slept. He's waiting, Callan whispered. For what? For me to rest first. 2 days later, the mayor of Bozeman held a press conference. They showed the body cam footage. Ekko finding the boy, the sprint through fire, the escape through the shaft. The clip went viral in less than 24 hours. The puppy who ran into fire. Ekko, the hero dog. 13-week-old K9 saves child and officer in blaze. But Callan ignored all of it. He only cared about one thing. That night, in their small cabin, Ekko finally curled up beside his bed and closed his eyes for the first time since the fire. Callan reached down, fingers bandaged, and touched the dog's ear. You did more than save us, he whispered. You reminded me what courage looks like. And somewhere deep in the quiet woods of Montana, a new legend was being written. Not about war, not about medals, but about a dog who didn't bark and never backed down. 2 weeks after the warehouse fire, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could for a man and a dog who had cheated death. Ekko had recovered fully. No burns, no trauma, but his behavior had changed. He no longer left Callan's side. Even at home, if Callan moved to another room, Ekko followed. He didn't play like other dogs. He didn't rest unless he knew Callan was safe, in sight, within reach. Dr. Alvarez called it hyperbonding, a psychological response to shared trauma, common among military K9s. Rare in dogs Ekko's age. Eventually he'll relax, she said, but it might take time, especially after what he did. Callan didn't mind. He understood, because he felt the same way. The bond between them was no longer professional. It wasn't even friendship. It was survival. Quiet, absolute, unbreakable. At least, that's what Callan thought, until the letter came. It was just after 6 a.m. when Callan found the envelope on his windshield. A government insignia at the corner. Official. Cold. He tore it open right there in the precinct parking lot. Inside, a transfer order. Ekko was to be reassigned to the Federal K9 Behavioral Division for advanced cognitive study and national deployment. Effective immediately. Callan froze. His pulse roared in his ears as he read it again. Reassignment. He stormed into the precinct. Captain Ridley looked up from his desk. I was going to tell you this morning. You were going to tell me? Callan's voice cracked. It came from Washington, California, higher than me. Higher than the department. You can't let this happen. Ridley stood, trying to keep his voice calm. They saw the footage from the warehouse. And the rescue, they ran tests on the data Dr. Alvarez sent. His neurological scan, his response times, he's off the charts. They want him in D.C. for National Crisis Ops. He's not some lab experiment. They're not treating him like one. They're taking him. Callan slammed the paper down. Ridley's face softened. You know I've got your back, but this is out of my hands. Callan's fist clenched. Not out of mine. He turned and walked out without another word. That afternoon, 2 agents from the Federal K9 program arrived, dressed in black. Punctual, polite. Callan didn't care. He met them at the training yard, where Ekko was doing silent drills with perfect precision. When the dog saw the agents, he froze. Then he looked at Callan, and didn't move. Agent Sullivan stepped forward. We'll take good care of him. No, you won't, Callan said flatly. You don't even know who he is. Sullivan's voice remained calm. We're aware of his behavioral uniqueness. That's why he's valuable. He's not valuable. He's loyal. Callan dropped to one knee, placing a hand on Ekko's chest. You hear me, bud? I didn't agree to this. They didn't ask. But I want you to know you didn't do anything wrong. Ekko leaned in, quiet, still. Then Callan stood and clipped the leash into the agent's hand. As Ekko was led toward the black SUV, he paused once. Look back. Callan didn't wave. He couldn't. The next week was a blur. Callan didn't talk much. He ignored calls from D.C., ignored Alvarez, ignored Ridley. He still patrolled, still wrote reports, still kept his boots polished. But he moved like a shadow of himself. He kept catching himself waiting to hear Ekko's quiet footsteps behind him, only to remember they weren't coming. In D.C., Ekko underwent testing. Cognitive, sensory, tactical. He passed everything. Then he passed tests they hadn't even designed yet. He was assigned a high-clearance handler, Agent Lena Ward, who had trained dozens of elite K9s. But Ekko didn't bond. He obeyed, followed commands, completed tasks. But at night he wouldn't eat, and he never slept unless someone played recordings of Callan's voice. Ward noted in her report, dog displays signs of severe attachment trauma, responsive only at mission-critical levels, emotionally disengaged otherwise. Recommend review. The review never happened. They needed him too much. Back in Montana, Callan finally cracked. He walked into Ridley's office on a Friday morning, and dropped his badge on the desk. "I'm done." The captain stood slowly. "Callan, I can't keep pretending he's just another dog. You know he's not." Ridley looked at the badge, then at the man he had watched lose a partner, then rebuild himself from ashes. "You're not just giving up the badge. You're giving up the part of yourself that survived because of him." Callan nodded. "That part left when Ekko did." And then he walked out. 1 week later, the call came. From D.C., Ekko had been deployed to a hostage crisis in New Jersey. Building collapse. Gas leak. Civilians trapped. Ekko had gone in with a team, but something had gone wrong. Inside the rubble, Ekko had located 2 unconscious victims. But instead of returning immediately, he stayed. He covered them with his body, shielded their airways with his body heat. He didn't leave until responders pulled him out by force. He'd passed out from smoke inhalation, refused water, wouldn't respond to handlers. Then something happened. One of the agents played a voice clip, an old body cam recording from Callan during the warehouse fire. And Ekko stirred, head lifted, eyes wide. Heart monitor jumped. The decision was immediate. They called Callan, and this time they didn't request. They begged. 3 flights. No suitcase. No hesitation. Callan arrived at the facility just after midnight. Ekko was sedated but conscious, lying in a recovery unit, breathing tube removed. When Callan stepped inside, Ekko lifted his head, weakly, but his tail moved once. Callan knelt. "I'm here, buddy." Ekko whimpered, low, deep, full of everything words couldn't hold. And in that moment, Callan knew, some bonds aren't just strong. They're sacred, and no system, no rank or badge could ever rewrite that truth. Ekko was cleared for travel 4 days later. He had stabilized, but the reports from the Washington facility were clear. He'd stopped engaging with anyone other than Callan, refused food from unfamiliar hands, ignored commands unless they mirrored Montana protocols. He hadn't barked in over a week. He was slipping, so they sent him back, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. And Callan? He met Ekko at the airport, standing just beyond security with a leash in one hand and something tighter clutched in the other. Guilt. The crate was wheeled in by a silent federal agent. Ekko's eyes locked on Callan before the doors even fully opened. There was no bark, no lunge, just stillness, recognition, relief. Callan opened the latch. Ekko stepped out slowly, placed his head gently against Callan's chest, and exhaled, like he had been holding his breath for weeks. Back in Montana, the cabin looked smaller somehow, as if the time apart had reshaped everything. Ekko moved from room to room, checking corners like he was making sure it was still theirs. Then he sat beside the front door and looked up at Callan. Home, but something was different. Callan could feel it. Ekko wasn't broken, but he wasn't whole either. He was quieter, slower, like a part of him had stayed behind in the rubble with the victims he'd refused to abandon. That night, Callan made a fire and lay down beside him on the floor. "Whatever they took from you," he whispered, "we'll get it back. But I need you to trust me again." Ekko didn't move, but Callan felt the weight of his head settle over his wrist. That was answer enough. They began again, step by step, light training in the woods, scent trails, retrieval, obstacle runs. At first, Ekko hesitated. He followed every command, but without the same sharpness. His movements were precise, but mechanical, until one afternoon, during a routine search, a sudden gust of wind knocked over a metal trash can beside the trail. The sharp bang echoed through the trees. Callan flinched. Ekko didn't. Instead, Ekko moved toward the sound, not with aggression, but with intention. Tail low, nose working, ears locked forward. Then he turned, looked back, and waited for Callan. It was the first time since the hospital that Ekko had taken lead. Callan caught up and whispered, "There you are." Dr. Alvarez ran a follow-up exam the following week. "He's healing," she said, watching Ekko nap beside the chair. "But the bond is different now. It's deeper. Like, he's not just loyal. He's anchored to you." Callan nodded. "I know the feeling." She hesitated. You also know that can be dangerous in the field. His focus is entirely dependent on you. I'm not letting him out of my sight again. I wasn't talking about him. Callan looked at her. I mean you, she said. If something happens to him this time, I don't think you'll come back from it. Callan didn't answer, because she was right. 2 weeks later, Callan received a call from the sheriff's office. A remote farmhouse out near Gallatin Forest had gone silent. A mother and her 2 kids hadn't shown up for school drop-off or answer calls. No history of abuse, no past trouble, but the tone in the dispatcher's voice was tight. Something feels wrong. The nearest patrol was 30 minutes out. Callan was 10. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his vest, Ekko's leash, and headed straight for the truck. As they drove through snow-covered hills, Callan glanced at his partner in the rear-view mirror. Ekko was sitting upright, ears up, eyes sharp. He was ready, more than ready. He was waiting for purpose. The house was eerily quiet. No footprints in the snow. Mail untouched. Front door locked. Callan circled the back and noticed the garage side window was cracked. Entry, he whispered. Ekko didn't need to signal twice. They moved in. The house was cold. Lights off. No sound. Then a faint clatter from upstairs. Callan drew his weapon. Ekko, sweep right. The dog moved ahead, silent as shadow. Callan climbed the stairs slowly, weapon tight, breath slow. And then he heard it, muffled crying, coming from behind a closed closet door. He moved fast, opened it. 2 children, eyes wide, gagged, hands bound, terrified. He dropped to his knees, ripped off the bindings. Where's your mom? He asked. But they pointed behind him. A noise, a creak. Someone was still in the house. Before Callan could react, a heavy thud hit the hallway wall. Then Ekko's bark, loud, fierce, followed by the sound of a struggle. Callan rushed out, weapon raised. At the end of the hall, Ekko had tackled a man in black tactical gear, masked, armed. The man reached for his pistol, but Ekko was already on him, teeth bared. Then silence. Callan arrived just in time to drag Ekko back as backup units flooded the house. The man was unconscious, disarmed, bloodied, but breathing. The kids were safe. And Ekko, standing, breathing hard, unblinking, like he'd never left Callan's side at all. Later, as the house filled with flashing lights and paramedics, Callan sat beside Ekko in the snow-covered yard. He didn't say much, just scratched behind his partner's ear. You brought me back, he said. Now it's my turn. Ekko pressed against his side. And in that moment, neither of them needed medals, headlines, or clearance levels. They had what mattered, each other, and a job worth coming home from. Winter passed quietly. Ekko had returned to the cabin with Callan, where days were slow, calm, almost sacred. His scars healed, but the mission was over. No more vests, no more sirens, just a forest, a fireplace, and each other. He wasn't the same dog, and Callan knew it. Ekko had aged quickly, not in body, but in soul. He had seen too much, fought too hard, and given too much of himself. The job had taken a part of him no scan could detect. But Ekko still had purpose, and he proved it one morning when a knock came at their door. A young boy, no more than 10, stood beside an officer. The kid held a piece of paper with shaky hands, a sketch of a German shepherd. The drawing was labeled, Ekko the Hero Dog. Callan crouched. You know about Ekko? My brother, he's the kid Ekko found in that farmhouse. He still has nightmares. But when he hears Ekko bark on TV, he says it makes him feel safe again. Ekko stepped forward slowly and gently nudged the boy's hand. The boy smiled, and Callan felt something in his chest break open. Ekko had saved more than lives. He'd saved hearts. In the months that followed, Callan was invited to speak at police departments, K-9 units, and veterans groups. They didn't want reports. They wanted Ekko's story. But the moment that hit hardest came during a speech at the National K-9 Service Summit. Callan had brought Ekko on stage. When he knelt to speak, Ekko placed his head in Callan's lap and didn't move the entire time. Callan's voice cracked only once. He never asked for recognition. He never hesitated. Even when injured, even when afraid, he chose service, not because he was trained, but because he loved. The room was silent, except for the sound of someone quietly crying in the front row. Time, however, doesn't stop for loyalty. A year after Ekko's return, his health began to decline. Slowly at first. Stiff joints, slower reaction, more naps than usual. Then one morning he didn't get up. Callan sat beside him for hours. Vets tried everything. But Ekko wasn't in pain, just tired. Deeply, eternally tired. Callan brought him home. That night, Callan laid down beside him on the cabin floor, just like he used to. He whispered the words they always trained with. Watch! Ekko didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the wood, still listening, still guarding, until the end. The funeral was private. Callan buried Ekko at the base of the pine tree they trained under for years. No medals, no flags, just a carved wooden marker with one word. Family! But what happened afterward surprised everyone. Letters came in. Hundreds of them. Children, police officers, survivors, trainers. People from all over the country who had been touched by Ekko's story. Some wrote about their own dogs. Others confessed they had feared dogs until they heard about Ekko. One letter, written in a child's handwriting, read, Dear Ekko, I'm not scared at night anymore, because I know you're watching from the sky now. Callan read that one over a dozen times, and he cried each time. 3 months later, Callan returned to the training facility in Helena, not as a trainee, as a mentor. He stood at the edge of the field, watching young dogs and young handlers trip through the obstacle courses Ekko once mastered blindfolded. He wasn't there to teach tactics. He was there to tell them what no one else would. That vest doesn't make them a hero, he told a new recruit, his hand resting on a pup's head. The bond does. And once you have it, you fight for it. The recruit looked up. But what if we lose them? Callan smiled. You don't. Not really. They stay in you. They teach you how to keep going. Years passed. The cabin remained the same, a little older, a little quieter. Callan never got another dog, but every morning, without fail, he'd put on Ekko's old collar and hang it by the door. Then he'd take a walk through the woods. Sometimes, if the wind was just right, he could still hear the faint crunch of paws beside him, still feel that presence, still hear that breath. Ekko hadn't left. He never would. And when people asked Callan how a dog could mean so much, he'd simply say, he wasn't just a dog. He was Ekko, and Ekkos never really fade.